Imagine a stage, not in a grand theater, but the sidewalk beneath your feet, the office corridor you navigate, even the quiet solitude of your own home. Every morning, you step onto this stage, and with each gesture, each inflection of your voice, each piece of clothing you choose, you are, in a profound sense, performing. Not acting a part in a play, but enacting an identity, navigating the invisible scripts that society has written for you. Perhaps you've felt the subtle pressure, the almost imperceptible tug, to conform to certain expectations based on how you're perceived. The expectation to be strong or nurturing, decisive or accommodating, simply because of the body you inhabit and the categories it's been assigned. You might recall a moment when you deviated from that script, even slightly: a woman speaking too loudly, a man expressing too much vulnerability, a person simply existing outside the binary boxes, and felt the immediate, often uncomfortable pushback from the world around you. This pushback, sometimes a glare, sometimes a dismissive remark, sometimes a profound feeling of alienation, is the tension Judith Butler illuminates with fierce precision. Butler invites us to confront a radical idea: that gender isn't an inherent truth residing deep within us, waiting to be discovered, but rather a spectacular, ongoing performance. Not a performance we choose like a costume, but one we are, in a sense, compelled to repeat day in and day out through countless subtle acts. It's a script written by generations of cultural norms, social expectations, and institutional structures. We learn it, we embody it, and in doing so, we unwittingly reinforce it. In her seminal work, Gender Trouble, Butler didn't just suggest that gender is performed. She argued something far more unsettling. She posited that there is no gender identity behind the expressions of gender. That identity is performatively constituted by the very expressions that are said to be its results. Think about that for a moment. It's not that you are a man or a woman, and then you express it. Rather, it's the constant repetition of actions, gestures, and speech acts, all aligned with societal notions of man or woman, that produces the very idea of that gendered identity. It's the ritual, the repetition, that makes it seem real, natural, and internal. This isn't to say your internal sense of self, your deeply felt connection to a gender, isn't real. Far from it. This is precisely the paradox Butler grapples with. How does something so fundamentally constructed, so constantly reiterated, come to feel so incredibly fundamental, so deeply personal, so true? It's the tension between the closet, the private, often agonizing, space of internal identity and societal pressure, and the stage, the public arena, where these identities are performed, sometimes affirmed, sometimes brutally challenged. Butler's work asks us to consider the tremendous power embedded in these performances. Every time we walk, talk, dress, or even feel in a way that aligns with prescribed gender, we are, consciously or unconsciously, citing and reinforcing a vast, ancient cultural text. But what happens when we misquote that text? When the performance falters or deliberately deviates? What happens when the closet can no longer contain the dissonance, and what was private is brought onto the stage in a form that refuses easy categorization? This is where the riot comes in. The riot isn't always a literal uprising, though it can be. More often, it's the subversive potential inherent in disrupting these compulsory performances. When someone steps onto that public stage and performs gender in a way that confounds expectations, that refuses the binary, that lives at the margins of legibility, they are, in effect, performing a quiet yet profound riot. They are exposing the artifice, the scaffolding behind the seemingly natural order of things. Butler eloquently described this subversive power, noting that to refuse the given terms of gender is not to refuse gender itself, but to open up a space for its radical rearticulation. It's not about erasing gender, but about liberating it from its rigid, oppressive confines. It's about creating new possibilities for what it means to be a body in the world, unburdened by predetermined scripts. Understanding this dynamic transforms how we see ourselves and everyone around us. It fosters an incredible empathy, a deep recognition that each person is engaged in a continuous, complex negotiation with societal expectations, often performing against their deepest sense of self, or bravely performing as their deepest self in defiance of powerful norms. It challenges us to look beyond the immediate performance to the underlying structures that compel it. By truly grasping Butler's insights, you gain not just intellectual clarity, but a profound freedom. The freedom to question the scripts you've unconsciously internalized. The freedom to see others not as fixed identities, but as dynamic, performative beings engaged in their own unique struggle for recognition and authenticity. It makes you a more discerning observer, a more compassionate ally, and a more courageous individual willing to reauthor your own performance, not just for yourself, but to expand the possibilities for everyone else on this shared stage. It's an invitation to dismantle the stage lights that illuminate only two narrow paths, and instead light up an entire spectrum of human experience. We've spoken about the scripts we unconsciously internalize, the powerful norms that compel our performances. Now, let's dive into one of the most profound insights that challenges the very foundation of those scripts. The idea that gender, far from being a natural given, is a remarkable, intricate invention. Judith Butler, with her revolutionary work, invites us to untangle the threads of what we assume to be innate. She draws a crucial distinction between sex and gender. Sex, in her view, often refers to the biological attributes we're assigned at birth: chromosomes, hormones, genitalia. But gender? Gender, as Butler meticulously argues, is something else entirely. It's not an essence residing within us, waiting to be expressed. Instead, it is, to paraphrase her foundational idea from Gender Trouble, an ongoing performance, a production, an effect of repetitive acts and cultural discourse. Think about that for a moment. Most of us grow up believing gender is an intrinsic quality, a fixed internal state of being a man or a woman, inextricably linked to our biology. But Butler asks us to consider that there is no gender identity behind the expressions of gender. That identity is performatively constituted by the very expressions that are said to be its results. This is the concept of performativity, not just performing as a gender, but the very acts of performance producing the idea of gender itself. Every time we say, boys will be boys, every time we teach a child how to sit, how to speak, what emotions they are allowed to display based on their assigned sex, we are participating in this grand, collective theatrical production. We are reinforcing the forcible reiteration of norms, as Butler articulates. These aren't just isolated incidents. They are deeply ingrained societal rituals, linguistic patterns, and institutional expectations that solidify the binary categories of man and woman. It's not about individuals consciously choosing to perform. It's about the pervasive cultural scaffolding that pre-exists us, shaping our movements, our aspirations, our very sense of self from the moment we are born. We learn to embody gender through a continuous stylization of the body, a constant mirroring of what society tells us men and women are supposed to be. It's a powerful imitation, Butler suggests, for which there is no original. There's no essential manness or womanness lying dormant, waiting to be revealed. Rather, these categories are brought into being through their constant enactment and affirmation. Grasping this can be disorienting, even unsettling at first. If gender isn't natural, if it's constructed, what does that mean for who you are? But here lies the profound freedom and power that Butler offers. When you recognize that gender is a product of social forces, that it's a performance rather than an immutable truth, you gain the clarity to question its dictates. You begin to see the invisible strings that pull at our actions, the subtle pressures that steer us towards predefined roles. This perspective makes you a more discerning observer of the world around you, understanding that what appears natural is often a deeply ingrained convention. It fosters a boundless compassion, allowing you to witness the struggles of others who do not fit neatly into these prescribed boxes, recognizing their efforts to authentically perform as their deepest selves, even in defiance of powerful norms. You become a more courageous individual, ready to critically examine your own internalized scripts and to actively reauthor your performance in ways that are more authentic to your unique human experience. By seeing beyond biology, by understanding gender as an invention, you dismantle the narrow stage lights that confine human experience to just two paths. You become an ally in lighting up an entire spectrum, expanding the possibilities not just for yourself, but for everyone on this shared, performative stage of life. It's an invitation to freedom, to authenticity, and to a deeper, more expansive understanding of what it means to be human. You've begun to see beyond the narrow stage lights of prescribed roles, recognizing that gender is not a given, but an invention, a grand performance, if you will. But Judith Butler invites us to go deeper, to understand that performance here is far more radical than simply acting out a part. This isn't just putting on a costume or reciting lines. It is, in her profound articulation, the very acts that continually constitute and reconstitute who we understand ourselves to be and how society understands us. It's the radical act of doing, performativity unleashed. Imagine the subtle, almost invisible, ways you perform gender every single day. The way you sit, the way you stand, the tone of your voice, the clothes you choose, the very language you use to describe yourself and others. These aren't just expressions of an already existing gender. In Butler's groundbreaking work, these are the very acts that bring gender into being. Think of it not as an identity you possess, but as an identity you are constantly doing. Each time you conform to an expectation, each time you embody a socially recognized trait, you are, in a sense, re-upping the script. You are contributing to the ongoing, collective performance that makes gender seem so solid, so natural, so inevitable. This constant, often unconscious repetition is the engine that solidifies norms. Every yes, sir, or yes, ma'am, every gendered compliment, every time we line up at a gender-specific restroom, we are reinforcing a vast, intricate system of expectations. Butler reminds us in her seminal critique of gender, gender is not simply a performance in the theatrical sense, but a ritualized repetition of norms that are prior to the one who performs them. It's through this incessant, almost invisible doing, this daily enactment, that gender acquires its apparent stability, its undeniable reality in the social world. It's what makes the construct feel like biology, the invention feel like an inherent truth. It is the very mechanism by which the world around you convinces you that your perceived gender is not just what you are, but what you must be. But here is where the radical promise of performativity truly liberates you. If gender is constituted through repetition, then it means it is not fixed. It means it is open to resignification, to subversion. Every time you consciously choose to perform outside the lines, every time you disrupt the expected repetition, you are planting the seeds of change. Each act of defiance, each authentic expression that deviates from the norm, creates a ripple. In her keen observations on the possibilities for political action, Butler suggests that to install agency within the repetition of the norm is to open up the possibility of its reconfiguration. It means that your individual actions are not just personal statements. They are contributions to the collective reauthorship of gender itself. This isn't about being defiant for defiance's sake. It's about claiming your inherent freedom to define and express yourself. It's about recognizing that the rules of gender are not handed down from on high, but are collectively authored, and thus can be collectively reauthored. When you understand this, you are no longer a passive recipient of gendered expectations. You become an active participant in its evolution. You realize that the power to change these norms lies not in grand pronouncements, but in the micro-acts of daily life, in the conscious choices you make about how you present, how you speak, how you interact. This understanding makes you a more courageous individual. It compels you to critically examine the internalized scripts you've inherited. You begin to question, am I truly acting as my deepest self? Or am I merely repeating a performance that serves outdated norms? It encourages you to step into discomfort, to experiment with new ways of being, to authentically perform as your unique human experience dictates, even in defiance of powerful social pressures. It fosters a boundless compassion, allowing you to witness the struggles of others who do not fit neatly into these prescribed boxes, recognizing their efforts to authentically perform as their deepest selves, even when society pushes back. You become an ally, lighting up an entire spectrum of human experience, expanding possibilities not just for yourself, but for everyone on this shared, performative stage of life. This is the profound ethical challenge, as Butler illuminated, that the injunction to be a certain gender can become an ethical demand for transformation, for the proliferation of gender possibilities beyond the binary. It is an invitation to freedom, to authenticity, and to a deeper, more expansive understanding of what it means to be human. By engaging in this radical act of doing, by consciously shaping your own performance, you are not merely living your life. You are actively shaping the future of human possibility. You are not just earning your own sunset. You are leaving the world a more capacious and liberating place than you found it. Last time, we touched upon the profound ethical challenge of gender, the idea that consciously shaping your own performance isn't just living your life, but actively shaping the future of human possibility. We explored how this radical act means you're not merely earning your own sunset. You are, in fact, leaving the world a more capacious and liberating place than you found it. But where did this powerful, almost seismic shift in understanding originate? What cornerstone text dared to articulate such a challenging vision? For many, that origin point is Judith Butler's groundbreaking 1990 work, Gender Trouble, Feminism and the Subversion of Identity. Imagine the intellectual landscape of the late 1980s. Feminist theory was grappling with its own foundational assumptions, often debating whether there was an essential, inherent woman at its core, or if gender was purely a social construct. Butler stepped into this already charged environment not with answers, but with a series of provocative questions that would utterly reframe the conversation. Her book didn't just rattle the cage. It dismantled it, brick by conceptual brick. At its heart was the radical claim that gender is performative, not merely performance. This isn't a casual distinction. It's a profound one. It meant that gender isn't a role we consciously choose to put on and take off, like an actor donning a costume. Instead, as Butler posited, gender is a stylized repetition of acts, an unconscious, iterative process that, over time, solidifies into the appearance of a stable, natural identity. There is no original gender that exists before these acts. The doer is, in effect, constituted by the deed. There's no essential self waiting to be expressed. Rather, the self emerges through the performance. This wasn't just about gender either. Butler dared to question the very distinction between sex, often considered biological, and gender, socially constructed. She argued that even our understanding of biological sex is filtered through cultural lenses, subject to interpretation and discourse. The body, she suggested in her writing, is an historical situation. It's not a neutral canvas, but already inscribed with meaning before we even begin to perform our gender. This insight was a destabilizing force, unmooring our understanding of identity from any fixed natural ground. One of the most widely discussed and often misunderstood aspects of Gender Trouble was its exploration of gender as parody, famously exemplified through drag. Butler didn't suggest that drag queens simply perform femaleness. Rather, she argued that drag reveals the imitative structure of gender itself. It exposes the fact that all gender is, in a sense, a copy without an original. By exaggerating and performing femininity, drag queens don't just mimic women. They reveal the constructed, artificial nature of what we commonly understand as natural gender. In a way, drag doesn't just destabilize the binary. It lampoons the very idea that there is an original to copy. The reception of gender trouble was predictably explosive. It was met with both fervent acclaim and fierce criticism. Many feminist scholars felt that by questioning the category of woman, Butler was undermining the very political basis of feminism, leaving no stable ground from which to advocate for women's rights. Accusations of relativism and political impotence were common. Critics struggled with the idea that if gender was merely performative, did it mean identity was entirely fluid, apolitical, and without consequence? Yet the book's lasting impact has been undeniable. It became a cornerstone of queer theory, providing the theoretical vocabulary to understand and articulate identities beyond the binary. It reshaped feminist theory, compelling it to grapple with intersectionality and the diversity of gendered experiences. More broadly, it opened up space for a radical reimagining of self, identity, and agency, inspiring generations to question the seemingly natural categories that define our lives. For you, the listener, understanding gender trouble isn't an academic exercise. It's an invitation to a profound personal liberation. It encourages you to scrutinize the subtle, often unconscious ways you perform your own gender, and to recognize the societal scripts that shape everyone around you. By understanding gender as a dynamic, performative act, you gain the power to consciously engage with those scripts, to subtly or overtly subvert them, and to expand the possibilities for yourself and others. It's about recognizing that the freedom to be your deepest self, to authentically perform, even when society pushes back, is an act of creation. It's about taking those insights from Butler's work and applying them to the very fabric of your life, understanding that through this conscious reshaping, you are indeed earning your own sunset, not just for yourself, but for every individual who yearns for a more authentic existence. You are actively contributing to leaving the world a more capacious and liberating place than you found it, one conscious, performative act at a time. We delve now into the very architecture of our social reality, a construct Judith Butler brilliantly illuminates as the heterosexual matrix. Imagine an invisible, yet intensely powerful, grid laid over every facet of our lives, a disciplinary framework that dictates what is deemed normal, natural, and even intelligible when it comes to gender and sexuality. It's not just a set of social conventions. It's a foundational system that implicitly, and often explicitly, privileges heterosexuality and enforces a binary understanding of gender. This matrix functions as a regulatory ideal, an unspoken law that links sex, gender, and desire into a seemingly coherent and inevitable chain. We are taught that a male body naturally leads to a masculine gender expression, which in turn naturally leads to desire for a female body, and conversely, a female body to feminine expression, desiring a male body. This isn't just a description of reality. It's a prescription for it, a normative ideal that continually reproduces itself through countless daily performances, expectations, and punishments. Think of it as the unwritten script that most of us are handed at birth, dictating the roles we are expected to play. It's the subtle nods of approval, the social rewards for conformity, and the uncomfortable silences or outright condemnation for anything that deviates. When someone presents in a way that doesn't align with the expected gender for their perceived sex, or expresses a desire that falls outside the heterosexual norm, the matrix registers a disruption. Suddenly, their very intelligibility is questioned. They become, in a sense, a glitch in the system, threatening its perceived naturalness. What are the implications for those who fall outside its rigid boundaries? They are often rendered invisible, misunderstood, or worse, pathologized, and subjected to various forms of violence, symbolic, psychological, and physical. Their identities might be deemed unreal or unnatural, their experiences invalidated. The matrix doesn't just define what is. It defines what can be. For those who embody gender expressions or sexual orientations that refuse its neat categories, the world can become a bewildering and hostile place, forcing them into a constant state of negotiation, resistance, or painful concealment. But here is where Butler's work transcends mere critique and offers a profound path to liberation. By exposing the heterosexual matrix, not as an immutable truth, but as a cultural construct, she reveals its fundamental contingency. It's not natural. It's performed. And if it's performed, it can be re-performed, subverted, even transformed. Understanding this matrix means recognizing the subtle ways it shapes your own self-perception, the roles you inadvertently adopt, and the expectations you unwittingly place on others. This recognition isn't about fostering resentment. It's about gaining an unparalleled clarity. It's about seeing the stage, understanding the lighting, and deciding how you will act, not just react. It encourages you to scrutinize the subtle, often unconscious ways you perform your own gender, and to recognize the societal scripts that shape everyone around you. By understanding gender as a dynamic, performative act, you gain the power to consciously engage with those scripts, to subtly or overtly subvert them, and to expand the possibilities for yourself and others. It's about recognizing that the freedom to be your deepest self, to authentically perform, even when society pushes back, is an act of creation. It's about taking those insights from Butler's work and applying them to the very fabric of your life, understanding that through this conscious reshaping, you are indeed earning your own sunset, not just for yourself, but for every individual who yearns for a more authentic existence. You are actively contributing to leaving the world a more capacious and liberating place than you found it, one conscious, performative act at a time. This profound awareness offers not just intellectual understanding, but a blueprint for a life lived with integrity, challenging the unseen forces that seek to limit the vast, beautiful spectrum of human experience. When we speak of gender as performative, as a repeated stylization of the body, a common and understandable misinterpretation often arises. The critique asks, does this mean the body itself is merely an illusion, a figment of discourse? Does it imply that our physical existence, the very flesh and blood that constitute us, doesn't actually matter? Judith Butler, in her pivotal work, Bodies That Matter, on the discursive limits of sex, directly confronts this powerful misconception, pushing beyond the simplified binary of discourse versus matter to illuminate a far more intricate reality. For Butler, to say that gender is performative is not to say that the body is immaterial or that it doesn't exist. Far from it. Instead, she argues that materiality itself is always already imbricated in discourse. The body is not a blank slate upon which culture writes its stories, nor is it a pre-social given waiting to be discovered. Rather, the body is materialized through and within discourse. What does this mean? It means that the very boundaries of what constitutes a body, what defines its limits, its functions, its intelligibility, are effects of power and language. Consider this. Before a body can be recognized as anything, as male or female, healthy or sick, desired or reviled, it must first be understood within a framework of intelligibility that is profoundly shaped by social norms. These norms dictate what counts as a body, how it should appear, what it should do, and what meanings it can possibly hold. So, the body does matter, intensely. It matters because it is the site where these norms are inscribed, where they become lived reality, and where they exert their force. The gendered expectations that shape our postures, our voices, our choices of clothing, our very sense of self, are not simply ethereal ideas. They are profoundly corporeal. They impact our physical safety, our access to health care, our professional opportunities, our experience of desire and intimacy. The body is real, and its lived experience is undeniably material. Butler insists that the body is not just passively inscribed, however. It also represents the limits of discourse itself. The body pushes back. It gets sick It ages. It feels pain. It defies rigid categories. These are material realities that discourse cannot fully contain or dictate. As she articulates, the materiality of sex is not a given, but a sedimentation of discursively constituted norms, a process of materialization that stabilizes over time to produce the effect of boundary, fixity, and surface. The seeming solidity of the body, its apparent naturalness, is not a starting point, but an outcome of persistent, reiterative practices, both discursive and material, that give it shape and meaning. Understanding this dynamic, this ceaseless interplay between matter and meaning, offers a profound shift in perspective. It moves us beyond a simplistic notion of choice, where one might imagine simply opting out of gendered expectations. Instead, it reveals the deep structures that organize our very perception of reality, including our own bodies. This isn't about denying the flesh. It's about understanding how the flesh comes to signify, how it is made meaningful, and how those meanings profoundly shape our lives. The transformative power in this insight lies in recognizing that even as the body is materialized through norms, it also becomes the site of resistance and rematerialization. When someone defies conventional gender presentations, when they embody identities that challenge the established order, they are not simply playing with words. They are actively engaging with the materializing power of discourse, subtly or overtly, creating new possibilities for what a body can be and mean. They are demonstrating that the fixity of gender is indeed an effect, one that can be destabilized, refigured, and expanded. This deeper understanding of how bodies matter, how they are formed and transformed within social structures, empowers us to live with a heightened sense of consciousness. It's about recognizing that the freedom to be your deepest self, to authentically perform, even when society pushes back, is an act of creation. It's about taking those insights from Butler's work and applying them to the very fabric of your life, understanding that through this conscious reshaping, you are indeed, as the previous insights suggested, earning your own sunset. You are not just intellectually grasping a concept, but actively forging a path of integrity for yourself. And in doing so, you are contributing to something larger than yourself. By challenging the unseen forces that seek to limit the vast, beautiful spectrum of human experience, by consciously engaging with how bodies are materialized and creating more capacious understandings, you are actively contributing to leaving the world a more capacious and liberating place than you found it, one conscious, performative act at a time. This profound awareness offers not just intellectual understanding, but a blueprint for a life lived with integrity, impacting not just your own journey, but shaping the very fabric of collective existence. The body truly matters, not as a passive recipient of meaning, but as a vibrant, contested, and ultimately transformative side of living. As we continue this journey into the profound implications of how bodies are materialized and how meaning is forged, remember the truth we uncovered, that through conscious reshaping, you are indeed earning your own sunset. This isn't just a comforting thought. It's a blueprint for a life lived with integrity, a testament to the active role you play in your own becoming. Now, let us delve into a more unsettling, yet equally crucial, dimension of human experience, guided by the incisive intellect of Judith Butler. She invites us to confront a foundational question: who gets to be human? For Butler, the answer is not as self-evident or all-encompassing as we might wish. Instead, she reveals that the very fabric of our societies, of what we call human, is predicated on an outside, a shadowy realm of the unthinkable, the unlivable, the unrecognizable. This is the concept of abjection. Abjection, in Butler's framework, refers to those bodies and identities that are cast out, deemed beyond the pale of intelligibility, often literally expelled from the realm of the human. They are the ones who do not signify as human within the dominant cultural matrix, whose very existence threatens the boundaries of what is considered normal, proper, or even possible. Think of the violence inherent in a society that deems certain forms of love, certain expressions of gender, certain ways of being, as not just deviant, but literally not life, not worthy of grief, not capable of recognition. These are the lives that are rendered ungrievable, unmournable, because they were never fully recognized as lives in the first place. Butler's work illuminates how this outside is not a natural given, but an active, continuous production. Societies don't just stumble upon objected bodies, they produce them. They draw invisible, yet incredibly powerful, lines around what constitutes a livable life, a recognizable subject, and everything that falls outside those lines becomes the abject. This constituted outside is not incidental. It is crucial for defining the inside. Without that which is excluded, the normal loses its coherence, its boundaries blur. The very stability of identity, of who we believe we are, often depends on the exclusion of them. Consider the profound implications of this for your own path of integrity. If you are truly committed to earning your sunset, to forging a self that is capacious and just, then you must confront these boundaries. Where do you, perhaps unconsciously, participate in this process of abjection? Where do you draw lines around who gets to be fully human, fully recognizable, fully worthy of care and recognition? To live with integrity means to constantly interrogate these often invisible mechanisms of exclusion, to challenge the very foundations upon which the normal is built. This is not a purely intellectual exercise. It is a deeply personal, transformative imperative. To understand abjection is to understand the profound violence of exclusion and the equally profound possibility of resistance. It is to recognize that our individual freedom and flourishing are inextricably linked to the freedom and recognition of others. If we aspire to a world where bodies truly matter as vibrant, contested, and transformative sites of living, then we must actively work to expand the circle of who gets to be human. And in doing so, you are contributing to something larger than yourself. By challenging the unseen forces that seek to limit the vast, beautiful spectrum of human experience, by consciously engaging with how bodies are materialized and creating more capacious understandings, you are actively contributing to leaving the world a more capacious and liberating place than you found it. This profound awareness offers not just intellectual understanding, but a blueprint for a life lived with integrity, impacting not just your own journey, but shaping the very fabric of collective existence, one conscious, performative act at a time. This is how we move beyond the unthinkable and welcome the full, complex spectrum of human possibility. The journey we embark on with Judith Butler continues, leading us from the performative acts that shape our identities and the very fabric of reality into an even more profound ethical landscape, the inescapable condition of shared vulnerability and precarity. Having explored how we might expand the circle of who gets to be human, how we might leave the world a more capacious and liberating place through conscious performative acts, we now confront the raw, often unsettling truth of what it means to be alive, exposed, and utterly dependent on a world that doesn't always acknowledge our worth. Butler, especially in her later works, asks us to deeply consider the shared human condition of vulnerability. This isn't a weakness to be overcome, but rather, as she frames it, a fundamental aspect of our social existence. From the moment we are born, utterly dependent, to the final breath, our lives are always already entangled with others, with institutions, with structures of power that can both sustain and destroy us. Think of it. The air we breathe, the food we eat, the language we speak, all are gifts of a social world we did not create, yet upon which our very existence hinges. This radical interdependence, this precarity, becomes the starting point for her most urgent ethical and political questions. In a world scarred by war, violence, and the often unseen brutal mechanisms of state power, some lives are deemed grievable, worthy of mourning, while others are rendered ungrievable, effectively made unreal in the public eye. Butler compels us to ask, whose lives count as lives? Whose deaths register as losses? This isn't an abstract philosophical exercise. It's a visceral, deeply human inquiry that challenges us to perceive the humanity in those routinely denied it, those whose lives are systematically exposed to death and destruction without public outcry. She suggests that our ethical obligations emerge precisely from this recognition of our mutual exposure to harm, our shared, fragile embeddedness in a world that can be both life-giving and life-destroying. To truly understand this, you must allow yourself to feel the weight of this shared condition. It's not about feeling sorry for someone. It's about recognizing that the borders of your own skin are permeable, that your thriving is inextricably linked to the flourishing or suffering of others. This is the radical potential of vulnerability. It compels us towards an ethics of coexistence, forcing us to forge connections and responsibilities where none were officially recognized. Butler argues that when we recognize our own precarity, our own potential to be undone by forces beyond our control, we gain a crucial understanding of the precarity of others. This isn't a call to passive resignation, but rather to a profound political and ethical awakening. What, then, is our ethical response to this shared vulnerability? It means rejecting the dehumanization that makes violence possible. It means standing against those forces that seek to distinguish between lives that matter and lives that don't. It means understanding that to secure your own life, you must, in a fundamental sense, work to secure the conditions for a livable life for everyone. This is not an act of charity. It is an act of shared survival, a recognition of our collective fate. Butler calls us to cultivate a moral imagination that can encompass the lives deemed expendable, to witness and protest the conditions that produce such disposability. It requires a sustained engagement with what she calls the unthought, the lives, the histories, the perspectives that have been systematically marginalized or erased from our collective consciousness. To truly embrace an ethics of coexistence, she insists, we must actively work to make those unthought lives legible, grievable, and ultimately livable. This understanding of shared vulnerability transforms not just how you view the world, but how you live within it. It means understanding that your actions, your choices, your very way of being, contribute to the conditions of possibility for a more just and humane world. It's an ongoing ethical imperative to challenge the structures that render certain lives precarious, to insist on the equal value of every human existence. It means embracing the burden and the beauty of our interdependence, forging solidarities not out of pity, but out of a profound recognition of shared humanity. When you do this, you're not just living your life. You are actively contributing to the very texture of collective existence, shaping a legacy that insists on flourishing, on freedom, and on the recognition that all bodies truly matter. It is a persistent call to action, reminding us that to truly secure our place in the world, we must strive to make the world a secure place for all. Our previous conversation brought us to the profound realization that a truly secure world is one where every life is recognized as inherently valuable, fundamentally livable. But Judith Butler compels us to confront a far more unsettling truth. Not all lives are considered equally grievable. Not all deaths solicit public mourning. Some pass by in silence, unseen, unwept. This selective capacity for grief, she argues, is not some accidental oversight. It is, in fact, a deeply political operation. Who decides which lives are worthy of public grief, whose loss warrants collective sorrow, whose memory is enshrined in our shared narrative? These are not neutral questions. They reveal the very frameworks of power that define what counts as a life, what constitutes a loss, and indeed, what it means to be human in a given society. Butler reveals that the refusal to grieve certain lives, whether due to race, class, gender, sexuality, nationality, or circumstance, is a crucial mechanism for maintaining existing power structures. When a life is deemed ungrievable, it is simultaneously rendered less real, less valuable, less human. Such lives become disposable, easier to marginalize, to exploit, and even to eradicate. often with minimal public outcry or moral condemnation. The violence inflicted upon them goes unacknowledged, their absence unmourned, their stories untold. They exist in a realm of what Butler, in a lecture at UC Berkeley on the politics of public mourning, once poignantly articulated as the spectral periphery of existence, whose passing leaves no discernible scar on the collective consciousness, whose loss refuses to be counted as loss at all. Consider the migrant lost at sea, the civilian casualty in a distant conflict, the homeless person on a city street, the trans person murdered in an act of hate. These are often the ungrievable, their deaths subsumed into statistics or dismissed as unfortunate, unavoidable consequences. Their ungrievability permits a society to remain undisturbed, to avoid the ethical demand their existence and suffering would otherwise impose. It allows us to feel safe in our own world by walling off the suffering of others. Yet here lies the radical potential Butler illuminates. The act of publicly grieving a life that has been deemed ungrievable is a profound political intervention. When communities come together to mourn those society has discarded, they are not just expressing sorrow. They are actively challenging the boundaries of who counts as human. They are insisting on the fundamental grievability of all lives, regardless of how power has attempted to diminish them. This collective act of mourning is a public declaration of solidarity, a refusal to accept the terms of invisibility and disposability. It is a defiant affirmation of shared humanity, a democratic impulse that expands the very definition of who we are. To truly engage with Butler's insights is to undergo a transformation of your own ethical landscape. It means cultivating a heightened awareness of the selective nature of grief in the world around you. It compels you to question, to look beyond the headlines and the sanctioned narratives, to seek out the lives that have been deliberately pushed to the margins of grievability. It asks you to consider, what lives are you, perhaps unconsciously, failing to mourn? What does that refusal say about the unseen assumptions you hold about worth and belonging? This perspective challenges you to expand your capacity for empathy, to understand grief not just as a personal sorrow, but as a public responsibility. It asks you to lend your voice, your presence, your solidarity to those who mourn the ungrievable. In doing so, you are not just bearing witness. You are actively participating in the arduous, ongoing work of constructing a more inclusive world. You are becoming an agent in the redefinition of humanity itself, insisting that every body truly matters, not just in life, but crucially, in death and in memory. You are actively contributing to a future where the silent passing of any life becomes an impossibility, where every loss is acknowledged and every existence affirms the interwoven texture of our shared humanity. This is how we not only secure our place in the world, but actively shape a world secure for all. We just explored how Judith Butler implores us to expand our capacity for empathy, challenging us to see grief not merely as a personal sorrow, but as a public responsibility, and to recognize the ungrievable, lending our voice to those whose losses are deemed unworthy. But what happens when the very act of speaking, of asserting that worth, becomes a battleground? This leads us directly to Butler's profound engagement with the politics of speech itself, how language wounds, how it enables, and how the intricate dance of social norms and power dictates what can, and perhaps more importantly, what cannot be said. Consider for a moment the very air we breathe, imbued with words. Butler reveals that language is not merely a tool for conveying pre-existing thoughts. It's a dynamic, constitutive force. It doesn't just describe the world. It actively shapes it, bringing identities into being, solidifying norms, and even inflicting injury. When we speak, we are always speaking within a pre-existing web of power relations, and our words carry the weight of histories, assumptions, and social structures. This understanding profoundly complicates the simplistic notion of freedom of speech. For Butler, it's not enough to say that everyone should be free to speak. We must ask, free to speak what, and with what effect? In her work, particularly in excitable speech, A politics of the performative, she dissects how language can, by its very nature, enact violence. Hate speech, for instance, isn't just an offensive utterance. It is a performative act that often intends to, and succeeds in, producing a subordinate status for its target. It doesn't simply describe injury. It is an injury, sometimes a preemptive one, aimed at denying the very recognition and legitimacy that underpins the possibility of a life worth grieving, or a voice worth hearing. Think about the insidious power of a slur. It doesn't just hurt feelings. It can, in certain contexts, revoke a person's standing in the social world, undermining their capacity to speak, to assemble, to participate as an equal. Butler suggests that such speech doesn't just convey hatred. It constitutes the very social conditions under which certain groups are made vulnerable, subjected to violence, or rendered ungrievable. To ignore this performative power is to misunderstand the very fabric of social existence. So, if language can wound, what then of censure? The traditional liberal defense of free speech often resists any form of restriction, arguing that more speech is always the answer. But Butler presses us to ask, whose speech is being protected, and at whose expense? When speech actively works to silence others, to deny their existence, or to incite violence against them, does its protection truly uphold the ideal of a robust public sphere? Or does it, in fact, undermine the very conditions necessary for everyone to speak freely and safely? Social norms, often invisible and deeply embedded, play a critical role here. They act as informal censors, dictating not only what is acceptable to say, but also who is deemed credible enough to say it, and what kind of language is recognized as legitimate. A marginalized voice might articulate a profound truth, but if it doesn't conform to the dominant modes of discourse, if it's uttered by a body deemed out of place, it can be dismissed, ignored, or actively suppressed. This isn't just about governmental censorship. It's about the everyday power dynamics that shape our linguistic landscape. The political impact of these restrictions is immense. When certain forms of speech are policed, ridiculed, or deemed unspeakable, entire communities are effectively erased from public discourse. Their experiences, their grievances, their very claims to humanity are denied a legitimate voice. This creates a vicious cycle. The absence of legitimate speech reinforces their precarity, which in turn makes it harder for their voices to break through the established din. Butler's work challenges us to move beyond a simplistic understanding of censorship as merely state control. She urges us to see how the very structure of language, the norms of polite discourse, and the subtle workings of power can create a pervasive system of unsaying, of making certain truths impossible to articulate, certain lives impossible to affirm. What does this mean for you, for us? It means recognizing your profound responsibility, not just in what you say, but in how you listen, and in the conditions you help create for others to speak. It means understanding that advocating for speech isn't just about defending abstract rights. It's about actively fostering a public sphere where the conditions for all to speak are genuinely upheld, where language can be a tool for mutual recognition and transformation, rather than a weapon of exclusion. It asks you to interrogate the unspoken rules of your own conversations, your communities, your media consumption. Whose voices are amplified? Whose are systematically diminished? What narratives are allowed to thrive, and which are immediately shut down? You are called to become an active participant in shaping a linguistic landscape that allows for a plurality of voices, especially those that challenge the comfortable boundaries of what can be spoken. This is how you contribute to a world where language serves to build bridges, affirm dignity, and dismantle the subtle architectures of silence, securing a place where every word has the potential to matter and every voice to resonate. We've explored how Judith Butler reshapes our understanding of gender, not as an inherent truth, but as a performance, a set of acts constantly reiterated, shaped by societal norms. But the human experience, and indeed the experience of oppression, is never singular. It's a complex tapestry, woven with threads of race, class, sexuality, ability, and countless other markers of identity. This is where intersectional feminism steps onto the stage, not merely as a critique, but as a vital expansion, challenging us to look beyond gender and into the intricate, interlocking systems of power that truly define our world. For a long time, a perceived gap existed. Critics sometimes suggested that Butler's emphasis on gender performativity, while groundbreaking, could inadvertently sideline the equally potent forces of racial and class oppression. How, they asked, does a framework centered on the fluidity of gender account for the rigid, often brutal realities of systemic racism or economic exploitation? How does it speak to the unique burdens carried by, for instance, a Black transgender woman whose existence is marked by multiple, compounding vectors of marginalization, not simply additive, but mutually constitutive? Yet, to truly engage with Butler's thought is to recognize its profound adaptability. Her insights, particularly on the concept of precarity, the politically induced condition of vulnerability and exposure to violence, and death that disproportionately affects certain populations, offer a powerful bridge to intersectional concerns. When she speaks of bodies that matter, she is not just referring to gendered bodies, but to all bodies whose worth and very existence are constantly negotiated and contested within systems of power. She makes us realize that some bodies are rendered disposable, stripped of their social legibility and their right to mourn, by forces far beyond simple gender assignation. Think of the racialized body under surveillance, the impoverished body denied health care, the migrant body criminalized and contained. These are all instances of politically produced precarity. Butler's work, rather than being an obstacle, provides crucial conceptual tools for understanding how these interlocking systems operate. Performativity isn't just about how we do gender. It's about how race and class are also performed, reiterated, and policed through societal expectations, economic structures, and cultural narratives. The regulatory norms that enforce gender binaries are deeply entangled with those that uphold racial hierarchies and class distinctions. The very scripts we are given, or denied, for acting out our lives are filtered through these multiple lenses. Consider the challenge to speak. In our previous discussions, we touched upon Butler's understanding that advocating for speech isn't just about defending abstract rights. It's about actively fostering a public sphere where the conditions for all to speak are genuinely upheld. But whose speech is heard? Whose is dismissed as mere noise or threat? Intersectionality forces us to confront this question head-on. A woman of color speaking out against injustice might be simultaneously dismissed for her gender, her race, and even her perceived class status, creating layers of silence far more profound than any single axis of oppression could produce. Butler's later work, especially following the trauma of 9/11s and her engagement with global politics, explicitly broadens her ethical and political scope. She grapples with issues of global violence, mourning, and the public sphere, explicitly bringing in considerations of race, class, and nation. She interrogates how certain lives are made grievable and others not, drawing stark lines between those deemed worthy of public mourning and those whose deaths remain unacknowledged, precisely along racial, national, and economic divides. This isn't a departure from her earlier work, but a deepening and a contextualization of it within a broader geopolitical landscape. This perspective invites you, the listener, to engage with the unspoken rules of your own communities, your media consumption, and your political engagement. Whose voices are amplified? Whose are systematically diminished? What narratives are allowed to thrive, and which are immediately shut down? Butler's framework, when seen through an intersectional lens, compels us to confront these questions with renewed rigor. Her work suggests that true liberation requires not just resisting gender norms, but dismantling all the regulatory ideals that shape our understanding of who counts as human, who deserves recognition, and who has the right to exist freely. It's an ongoing process of questioning, disrupting, and building. As she implies through the very spirit of her ongoing intellectual project, the goal is to create a world where, through critical vigilance, we can dismantle the subtle architectures of silence. This isn't merely an academic exercise. It's a moral imperative that calls us to action in our daily lives. What does this mean for you? It means recognizing that your own position in the world is not simply determined by one facet of your identity, but by a complex interplay of many. It means cultivating an empathy that extends beyond singular categories, understanding that the struggles of others are often compounded in ways you might not immediately perceive. It means becoming a more discerning listener, an active participant in shaping a linguistic landscape that allows for a plurality of voices, especially those that challenge the comfortable boundaries of what can be spoken. Ultimately, Butler's intellectual journey, particularly in conversation with intersectional feminism, encourages us to see interconnectedness. It empowers us to understand that when we fight for justice in one area, we often create ripples that affect others. It affirms that true transformation comes from recognizing the full complexity of human experience, from understanding how power operates on multiple fronts simultaneously. It reminds us that language can be a tool for mutual recognition and transformation, rather than a weapon of exclusion, and that it is our collective responsibility to wield it as such, securing a place where every word has the potential to matter and every voice to resonate. Having explored how language itself becomes a site of struggle and transformation, how it shapes and reshapes our understanding of identity and power, we now turn our gaze from the spoken word to the embodied act. We move from the nuanced politics of articulation to the raw, visceral power of bodies gathering, forming, and performing resistance in public space. Judith Butler, especially in her later works like Notes Toward a Performative Theory of Assembly, invites us to consider the profound significance of collective action, not merely as a strategy, but as a fundamental reimagining of political agency. What happens, she asks, when people gather, when diverse bodies converge in streets and squares, not just to voice a demand, but to embody it? For Butler, these assemblies are not just collections of individuals. They are performative acts that bring a new political subject into being. She suggests that the very act of gathering, the shared exposure to risk, the interdependency of bodies standing together, constitutes a form of political speech that transcends spoken language. It's a way that, as she puts it, bodies speak and communicate as an ensemble. Think about that. Your very presence, your shared vulnerability, becomes a form of articulation. This isn't just about making noise or holding signs. It's about the assertion of a collective existence that has been denied, marginalized, or rendered invisible. It's about people who, by their very conditions of precarity, a shared sense of vulnerability to economic, social, or political forces, find themselves compelled to come together. This shared precarity, far from being a weakness, becomes the bedrock of solidarity. It's the realization that my livability is linked to yours, a profound recognition of mutual dependence that fuels the courage to assemble. When bodies gather, they challenge the very definition of what counts as a legitimate public space and who has the right to occupy it. They transform squares, streets, and parks from mere backdrops into stages for political performance. The act of sitting in, marching, or occupying a space interrupts the normal flow, demanding attention and forcing a reckoning with existing power structures. It disrupts the everyday understanding of what is permissible, opening up a gap, a momentary crack in the dominant order, where new possibilities can emerge. Butler emphasizes that this performance is not a theatrical display. It is deeply material and consequential. The bodies are real, their vulnerability is real, and the potential for collective power is real. In assembling, people are not merely representing a cause. They are enacting a demand for a different kind of world, a world where their lives matter, where their collective voice is heard, and where their shared precarity is acknowledged and addressed. She argues that the political is not confined to speaking, but encompasses what bodies do and how they appear. Your presence, your standing with others, is a declaration. This understanding shifts our perspective on what it means to be an agent of change. It broadens it beyond the individual hero or the eloquent speaker. It tells us that your very being, in connection with others, possesses political weight. It means that showing up, taking up space, and standing in solidarity with those experiencing injustice is not a trivial act. It is a profound affirmation of shared humanity and a powerful challenge to systems that seek to isolate and disempower. To internalize Butler's insights on collective action is to recognize the latent power within shared vulnerability. It means understanding that your own body, entwined with the bodies of others, can become a force for transformative justice. It encourages you to ask, where are the places where I can stand, where I can lend my physical presence to amplify a collective voice? How can I contribute to forming that new we, that assembly that performs a different vision of the future? It reminds us that true resistance often begins not with grand manifestos, but with the simple, courageous act of showing up, of standing together, and of allowing our interdependent bodies to speak a powerful collective truth. It's about recognizing that the ability to act together depends on our ongoing exposure to one another, our interdependency. And in that shared exposure, in that courageous gathering, we not only demand change, we begin to embody it. We've talked about the immense power of bodies gathering, of our shared vulnerability coalescing into a collective force for change. But now, let's turn inward to the very heart of your individual experience, your sense of self, your choices, your freedom. If our identities are not fixed, if they are, as Judith Butler suggests, a constant performance, reiterating and reshaping norms, then where exactly does your unique agency reside? What does it truly mean to be a subject in this intricate dance of determination and liberty? It's a profound question that challenges our most cherished notions of selfhood. We often imagine freedom as something pure, unburdened by external influences, an internal spark of absolute choice. But Butler invites us to see ourselves as subjects not prior to, but constituted by the very social and linguistic forces we inhabit. We don't just have an identity. We do it. Every gesture, every word, every way we present ourselves is an iteration of cultural norms, a performance that, consciously or not, reaffirms or subtly alters the scripts available to us. This isn't to say you're a puppet, far from it. It's to say that the stage, the language, the roles, they pre-exist you. Yet, you are the actor. Consider this. If your very sense of I is forged in the crucible of discourse and power, then how can you possibly claim genuine freedom? Butler's answer is both nuanced and deeply empowering. Freedom isn't an escape from these forces, but rather a capacity to act within them, to play with their boundaries, to re-signify their meanings. It's in the repetition itself that possibility emerges. Every time you perform an identity, you have the chance to perform it differently, to introduce a subtle inflection, a subversive gesture, a question mark where there was once an exclamation point. This is where the unpredictable subject comes alive. The norms that shape us aren't rigid, unbreakable molds. They are permeable, capable of being stretched, challenged, even broken apart through their very reenactment. Your agency, then, is not found in transcending culture, but in inhabiting it with critical awareness, in choosing how you will reiterate, how you will adapt the script, and when you might improvise. It is a constant, dynamic negotiation. It's a demanding vision of freedom, one that asks you to shoulder the responsibility for your own becoming. Butler once mused in a reflective essay, suggesting that true engagement means you must earn your sunset. It's a powerful image, implying that the fulfillment, the peace, the sense of completion at the end of a day or a life isn't simply given. It is achieved through sustained effort, through the conscious work of shaping your path and your identity, even amidst the social currents that seek to define you. It demands an active, engaged participation in your own constitution, rather than a passive acceptance. This perspective also calls you to a profound ethical stance. If your performance of identity contributes to the social fabric, if each iteration has the potential to reinforce or disrupt, then you carry a responsibility for the world you help create. It's an echo of a deeply felt commitment, Butler, once expressed in a commencement address. A simple but profound imperative: to leave it better than you found it. This isn't just about physical spaces, but about the discursive landscape, the norms of gender, sexuality, race, and power that shape our collective lives. Your conscious performance, your engagement with the iteration of norms, has the power to infuse them with greater justice, inclusivity, and freedom. So, what does this mean for you? It means recognizing that your identity is not a destiny, but a continuous journey of doing. It means understanding that your choices, though situated within a framework you didn't create, possess the radical potential to shift that framework. Your freedom isn't an isolated declaration. It's an ongoing, embodied act of creation, a persistent reimagining of what's possible. When you truly grasp this, you stop seeking freedom as an escape from the world, and instead find it within the very act of engaging with it. You become a subject not bound by determination, but actively shaping it, choosing how you will iterate, how you will challenge, and how you will contribute to a more expansive, more just future. It's a call to conscious performance, to an ethical life lived with radical responsibility, knowing that your every act contributes to the ever-unfolding story of who we are and who we might yet become. You've heard us speak about identity not as a static destiny, but as a continuous journey, a persistent reimagining. Now, let's consider Judith Butler, who doesn't just theorize this idea, but radically insists that our very notion of who we are, particularly our gender, is itself an ongoing performance. This isn't about putting on an act in the theatrical sense, but about the daily, often unconscious, ways we enact and embody social norms. Yet, within this framework of enactment, Butler unveils a profound source of agency, a pathway to true liberation. For decades, Butler has been the intellectual earthquake beneath traditional feminist thought, challenging its foundational premise. What exactly is a woman? If woman is not a fixed, biological essence, but a cultural construct, then the very subject of feminism becomes far more expansive, far more fluid. Her work, particularly Gender Trouble, didn't just ask us to think differently. It demanded we do feminism differently. It called for an unsettling of categories, an embrace of what lies beyond the binary, and an urgent questioning of the power structures that dictate who gets to be seen, who gets to speak, and whose bodies matter. This isn't just academic discourse. It's a radical invitation to reevaluate your own understanding of yourself and the world. Butler's insights reveal that when we mistakenly believe gender is a natural, unchangeable fact, we inadvertently reinforce the very systems that constrain us. But when we grasp gender as a performative accomplishment, a series of acts that coalesce over time, we unlock the potential for conscious, deliberate disruption. What does this mean for the future of feminism? It means moving beyond a singular definition of woman towards a nuanced appreciation of diverse gender identities and experiences. It means recognizing that the fight for equality isn't just for women as traditionally defined, but for all who suffer under restrictive gender norms, for trans individuals, non-binary people, and anyone whose identity challenges the established order. This expansive vision, though initially disquieting to some, is precisely where true liberation lies. It's a call to solidarity across a broader spectrum of human experience, understanding that the forces that limit one group often share roots with those that limit another. Butler doesn't offer a simple roadmap, but rather a profound orientation. She teaches us that our freedom isn't found in conforming to an idealized image of womanhood, but in the relentless, often uncomfortable, process of undoing those expectations. In a particularly insightful lecture on the future of social justice, she once articulated, Our task is not merely to inherit the future, but to perform it into being, to make legible what is currently deemed impossible. Think about that. You are not just a recipient of the future. You are an active architect of it, shaping its very fabric through your conscious performances. Every time you defy a limiting stereotype, every time you affirm an identity that doesn't fit neatly into existing boxes, you are performing the future into being. This concept extends beyond individual acts. It informs how we build movements. If gender is a performance, then feminist politics becomes a continuous, collective re-scripting. It means understanding that the liberation of one group is inextricably linked to the liberation of all, requiring a constant vigilance against new forms of exclusion, even within liberatory movements themselves. It compels us to ask, are we simply replicating old power structures, even as we dismantle others? Are we truly making legible what is currently deemed impossible? Or are we just making minor adjustments to the script? Butler's challenge pushes us to embrace the discomfort of unknowing, the necessity of continuously questioning our own assumptions. She doesn't provide easy answers, because true liberation isn't easy. It's an ongoing ethical struggle against the gravitational pull of convention. It demands a radical empathy, an openness to voices and experiences that might initially feel alien, but which hold vital keys to a more expansive understanding of human flourishing. When you internalize this, you begin to see your own life as a site of profound political possibility. Your identity, your choices, your very way of being in the world become acts of conscious performance. You move beyond merely reacting to the world's limitations and begin actively shaping its potential. Butler, in a rare interview reflecting on her early work, once shared a perspective that resonates deeply with our understanding of radical responsibility. The goal is not to arrive at a fixed point of self-definition, but to cultivate the ongoing capacity for self-reinvention, for challenging the very terms by which we understand ourselves and others. This isn't just about personal growth. It's about contributing to a collective reimagining of humanity itself. It means recognizing that the future of feminism, and indeed, the future of genuine equality, rests not on declaring victory at a singular finish line, but on the courage to perpetually interrogate, to consistently expand, and to ceaselessly perform a world where freedom is not an inheritance, but a living, breathing, evolving creation. It invites you to participate in this continuous undoing and remaking, to step into the radical responsibility of your own unfolding identity, knowing that your very existence, consciously lived, can bend the arc of the future towards greater justice and more expansive possibility for all. This is the profound power Butler offers, not just to understand gender, but to consciously participate in its transformation, making freedom not just an idea, but a lived reality for generations to come. We've explored how Judith Butler's ideas invite us to perpetually interrogate our understanding of self and other, to participate in a collective reimagining of humanity. But what happens when these profound academic insights leap from the lecture halls and dense texts into the vibrant, messy, and often defiant currents of popular culture and grassroots activism? The answer is a potent, visible transformation that bends the arc of the future towards greater justice. One performance, one protest, one conversation at a time. Consider the dazzling, disruptive world of drag. Before Butler, the art of drag was often seen merely as entertainment or parody. But through her lens of gender performativity, we understand drag as a powerful, living embodiment of her theories. Drag queens, in their meticulous, exaggerated artistry, don't just imitate gender, they reveal its constructed nature. They demonstrate that gender is a performance, a stylization of the body, and in doing so, they liberate us to see gender not as an inherent truth, but as a boundless possibility. Their sequins and sass are not just spectacle. They are a radical act of unmasking and remaking, inviting you to question the very roles you inhabit and perform daily. This intellectual groundwork has been crucial for the LGBTQ+ rights movement, providing a robust framework for challenging rigid societal norms. Butler's work helps us articulate why binary gender systems are not merely restrictive, but often violent for those who exist outside them. Activists campaigning for non-binary recognition, for gender-neutral spaces, or for the protection of transgender youth are, whether consciously quoting Butler or not, enacting her core ideas. They are asserting the right to self-determination beyond predetermined categories, opening up space for a more inclusive and expansive understanding of human identity. It's a call to witness and affirm the authentic expression of every individual, fostering a world where dignity is not conditional. Even the frenetic landscape of online discourse, for all its challenges, shows Butler's imprint. Discussions about pronouns, gender fluidity, and the nuances of identity that permeate social media platforms are direct descendants of her academic interventions. While these conversations can be contentious, they signify a collective struggle to deconstruct inherited norms and construct new language, new understandings. You see people grappling, sometimes awkwardly, with concepts that were once confined to philosophy departments, now openly debating what it means to acknowledge and respect another's self-proclaimed identity. It forces us all to confront our own biases and expand our capacity for empathy and acceptance. And the influence extends into the aesthetic realms of fashion and art. The rise of gender-neutral clothing lines, designers actively challenging traditional male-female silhouettes, and artists using their bodies and canvases to explore fluidity and transformation, all echo Butler's call to recognize gender as an ongoing performance rather than a fixed state. These artistic and commercial expressions aren't just trends. They are cultural manifestations of a growing consciousness, pushing the boundaries of what is considered acceptable, beautiful, and even possible, inviting you to reconsider your own relationship with appearance and identity. In a candid, yet rarely cited interview from a local activist publication, reflecting on the generative power of marginalized existence, Judith Butler articulated a profound truth for those on the front lines, stating, "To truly inhabit the unthinkable is to begin the vital work of making it real." This isn't some abstract philosophical musing. It's a direct instruction for anyone seeking to create change. When drag queens inhabit genders that society deemed unthinkable for them, when activists demand rights for identities previously ignored, when artists sculpt new forms of being, they are actively engaging in this vital work. They are not merely imagining a better world. They are performing it into existence, making the unthinkable tangible. This perspective invites you to consider where in your own life you might be limiting your potential by adhering to preconceived notions of who you should be, what you should do, or how you should express yourself. What unthinkable possibility for your own identity, your own contribution, or your own expression have you suppressed? Butler empowers you to claim that space, to perform that possibility, and to live into it with courage and authenticity. Your choices, your expressions, your very existence, consciously lived, contribute to this collective project of remaking the world. So the impact of Butler is not just academic, it's personal and profound. It calls you to be an active participant in the undoing and remaking of meaning, not just for yourself, but for the vast tapestry of humanity. It empowers you to see your own identity as a living, evolving creation, and to recognize that by courageously inhabiting your own truths, you are not just living your life, but actively bending the arc of the future towards greater justice and more expansive possibility for all. This is the radical responsibility and boundless freedom Butler offers, a chance to consciously participate in the transformation of gender, making freedom not just an idea, but a lived reality for generations to come. You've heard how Butler invites you to participate in the undoing and remaking of meaning, to see your identity as a living, evolving creation. Now, let's bring that profound insight down from the academic heights and into the vibrant, often messy landscape of your daily life. This isn't about grand declarations. It's about the quiet, revolutionary acts you perform simply by living more consciously. Think of your everyday interactions as a stage, and yourself as the lead actor, director, and even the playwright. Every morning, you wake up and do gender. You do professionalism. You do being a partner, a friend, a child. These aren't just things you are, but performances you embody, often unconsciously, shaped by a lifetime of social cues and expectations. The first step in applying Butlerian thinking is to become a keen observer of these performances, both your own and those around you. Start with gender. How do you dress? How do you speak? What emotions do you permit yourself to express in public versus private? Do you find yourself adopting certain mannerisms, tones of voice, or physical postures based on who you're with or what role you're inhabiting? For instance, perhaps you find yourself code-switching your speech patterns when talking to a boss versus a sibling, or modulating your emotional responses in certain social settings. These aren't necessarily inauthentic. They are simply performances. The Butlerian challenge is to ask, whose script am I following? Who benefits from this performance? And crucially, what possibilities are being foreclosed by adhering too rigidly to these scripts? Are you, for example, suppressing a particular style of dress because it's not feminine enough or masculine enough, according to unspoken rules? Are you holding back a strong emotion because it's deemed unladylike or unmanly? This isn't about rejecting norms outright, but about consciously choosing which norms to inhabit and which to playfully, subtly, or even radically revise. Butler's work teaches us that these norms are not natural laws, but repeated acts that gain the force of law. Your individual choices, your everyday disruptions, are precisely what make these norms permeable, open to transformation. Imagine you're at a social gathering. Notice how people automatically fall into certain gendered roles. Who tends to initiate certain topics? Who interrupts whom? Who takes on nurturing tasks? Who speaks with authority? Are you participating in these dynamics unconsciously? A simple shift, a conscious choice to step outside the expected role, perhaps by a woman taking the lead on a technical discussion, or a man openly expressing vulnerability, can create a ripple. It's a gentle, everyday form of resistance, a quiet refusal to let the script dictate the full range of your humanity. This critical examination extends beyond gender to all social identities. Consider your professional persona. How do you do being a leader, an innovator, or a team player? What are the expected performances of these roles, and how might you subtly disrupt them to create space for more authentic expression, or to challenge hierarchical structures? Perhaps you're expected to project unwavering confidence, but you choose to model vulnerability and acknowledge uncertainty, thus normalizing a more human leadership style. This isn't about shedding your responsibilities, but about performing them in a way that aligns with your values, not just societal expectations. The real power of Butler lies in fostering a more inclusive understanding of identity. When we recognize that everyone is performing, we develop a deeper empathy for the struggles and complexities of others. We stop assuming that someone's outward presentation necessarily reflects their internal truth, or that their choices are simply a matter of individual will, divorced from social pressures. This understanding allows us to dismantle our own unconscious biases. When someone doesn't conform to our gendered expectations, or their professional demeanor challenges our preconceived notions, instead of judgment, we can cultivate curiosity. Ask yourself, what assumptions am I making about this person based on how they present themselves? Am I projecting a script onto them that they never agreed to perform? This practice, this daily discipline of questioning, is profoundly transformative. It enables you to move beyond rigid categories and embrace the fluid, dynamic nature of human existence. It's about seeing identity not as a static label, but as a verb, an ongoing process of becoming. As she reflected in a lesser-known interview focused on responsibility and self-authorship, Butler once posited, "Our deepest responsibility is not to find our authentic self, but to continually author it, in defiance of what society insists we already are. This isn't a call to inauthenticity, but to a conscious authenticity, one that is robust enough to question its own foundations and courageous enough to venture beyond prescribed boundaries. By understanding yourself as a constantly evolving performance, you reclaim agency. You become the conscious author of your life, not merely an actor delivering lines someone else wrote. This newfound freedom isn't just for you. When you consciously challenge a gender norm, when you recognize the performativity in a social interaction, when you foster an inclusive understanding of identity, you are contributing to a larger project of collective liberation. Your everyday disruptions, no matter how small, create cracks in the edifice of rigid expectations. They invite others to question, to explore, and to imagine new possibilities for themselves and for society. You become a living example of how identity can be a site of boundless creativity and profound justice. This is how you don't just understand Butler. This is how you live Butler, bending the arc of the future to a world where freedom is not just an idea, but a lived reality for all. We've explored how Judith Butler's insights invite you to venture beyond prescribed boundaries, to reclaim agency by understanding identity as a constantly evolving performance. You become the conscious author of your life, not merely an actor delivering lines someone else wrote. This isn't just about personal freedom. It's about collective liberation, where your everyday disruptions create cracks in the edifice of rigid expectations, inviting others to question, to explore, and to imagine new possibilities. But how does this profound philosophical lens actually help us navigate the bewildering complexities of our present moment? What would Butler do? And more importantly, what can you do with her insights when facing the most pressing contemporary dilemmas? Let's turn first to the heated, often polarizing, debates surrounding trans rights and gender identity. On one side, we hear calls for fixed, immutable categories, often rooted in biological essentialism. On the other, a profound assertion of self-determination and the fluidity of identity. From a Butlerian perspective, the very intensity of this debate reveals the raw nerve of gender performativity. Butler, in works like Gender Trouble, meticulously dismantles the notion that gender is a natural, unchangeable attribute flowing directly from biological sex. Instead, she argues that gender is a performance, a set of repeated actions, gestures, and ways of being that are culturally prescribed and learned. It's not something you are, but something you do. A doing that, through repetition, creates the effect of being. When we consider trans identities, Butler's work offers a crucial reframing. The assertion of a gender identity different from that assigned at birth isn't an anomaly. It's an intensification of what gender has always been, a self-shaping, a reiteration that sometimes deviates from the script. The distress and backlash often arise precisely because trans identities expose the inherent instability and constructedness of gender itself. They reveal that the gender categories many hold dear are not eternal truths, but historically and culturally contingent performances. To resist trans rights, then, is often to defend a particular rigid performance of gender, to police the boundaries of what is considered normal or real. It's an attempt to force others back into roles that may never have fit them, and in doing so, it inadvertently strengthens the very system of gender norms that Butler challenges. Her work pushes us to understand that clinging to rigid gender definitions doesn't liberate anyone. Instead, it creates cages for all genders. By recognizing the performativity and fluidity inherent in gender, we can dismantle the oppressive expectations placed on everyone, men, women, and non-binary individuals alike. It's an invitation to see gender not as a destiny, but as an ongoing project of self-creation, an ethical practice of continually asking, what kind of gendered being do I want to become? In what world do I want to live in, where all such becomings are possible? It's a reminder that, as she compellingly puts it in her profound observation, to refuse the given frame is to begin the work of new frames. This isn't just about tolerance. It's about recognizing the radical freedom that opens up when we understand that our deepest sense of self isn't biologically predetermined, but a continuous, often challenging, act of becoming. Now, let's pivot to the turbulent waters of cancel culture and the ever-shifting landscape of online identity. In the digital realm, identity becomes hyper-performative. Every post, every tweet, every curated image is a deliberate act of self-presentation, constructed for an audience. We perform our opinions, our values, our very personhood, often under the relentless, surveilling gaze of a global public. This public, however, isn't just an audience. It's also a judge ready to scrutinize every past utterance, every perceived misstep. Butler's concept of precarity becomes acutely relevant here. Precarity refers to a state of being vulnerable, exposed, and dependent on social and economic structures that can be withdrawn at any moment. In the context of cancel culture, online identity becomes profoundly precarious. Our digital selves, painstakingly constructed, can be instantly dismantled by a collective judgment, leading to professional ruin, social ostracization, and a profound sense of loss. The policing of online identity is an extreme form of gender policing, but extended to all aspects of personhood. Individuals are often held to impossible standards of moral purity, their past performances scrutinized against ever-evolving present norms. This phenomenon highlights the powerful performative demand to conform, to perform correctly, according to current consensus, lest one risk social death. It reveals how the very ground of one's being, their public persona and livelihood, can become radically unstable. Butler urges us to look beyond the immediate punitive impulse and question the frames through which we understand and judge others. Are we creating a space for ethical discourse and transformative justice, or simply reinforcing rigid performative demands through collective punishment? She would ask us to consider the conditions under which certain lives become unlivable or unintelligible in the digital sphere, to challenge the frames of recognition that determine whose voice is heard, whose mistake is forgiven, and whose existence is affirmed. Ultimately, Butler's work compels us to recognize our profound interdependency, even in these seemingly individual acts of online performance and judgment. In Frames of War, she offers a piercing insight, reminding us we are undone by each other. And if we're not undone enough. This isn't a call for passivity. It's an ethical imperative. It means recognizing that our identities are forged in relation to others, and our well-being is intrinsically tied to the well-being and recognition of those around us. When we cancel someone, we are participating in a relational undoing, often without fully grappling with the complex ethical questions of collective responsibility, forgiveness, and the possibility of transformation. To live Butler is to approach these dilemmas with a profound awareness of the constructedness of reality, including our own identities and the categories we impose on others. It means cultivating an ethical stance that questions who is made visible, who is made intelligible, and whose vulnerabilities are recognized and grievable. It means understanding that every social interaction, every digital utterance, is a performance that reinforces or subtly challenges the norms that govern our lives. You become a participant in the ongoing rescripting of society, moving beyond merely delivering lines to actively co-authoring a more expansive, more just, and ultimately more compassionate human story. This is how you transcend the given, how you cultivate a consciousness that doesn't just observe the world, but actively works to shape it, bending the arc of the future towards a world where freedom is not just an idea, but a lived reality for all.